There are nights that go down in history not because they were planned, but because someone made a catastrophic mistake. This is the story of one such night. A night when a massive, arrogant man decided to test the patience of Bruce Lee by crossing a line that no man should ever cross. He insulted Lee's family, and Bruce Lee, the smallest man in the room, quietly rose to remind the world why legends are not made in gymnasiums alone. To understand what happened that night, you must first understand who Bruce Lee truly was. Not the movie star, not the icon on the poster, but the man underneath the myth. Because the man underneath was far more dangerous than anything the cinema ever captured. Bruce Lee was born on November 27, 1940, in San Francisco, in the Chinese Year of the Dragon, during the Hour of the Dragon. His father, Li Hoi-chen, was a famous Cantonese opera star, and his mother, Grace Ho, was of Chinese and German descent. From the very beginning, Bruce Lee seemed destined for a life that defied ordinary categories. Growing up in Hong Kong, Bruce was a street fighter before he was a martial artist. The streets of Kowloon were rough, and young Bruce found himself in rooftop brawls and back-alley confrontations more times than his family could count. His mother worried constantly. His father hoped martial arts would give the boy discipline rather than just more reasons to fight. At 13, Bruce began training under the legendary Wing Chun master Ip Man. What happened next is the stuff of martial arts folklore. Bruce absorbed the art faster than any student Ip Man had ever seen. He drilled obsessively, practicing punches on a wooden dummy until his knuckles bled, rising before dawn to run, to think, to sharpen his mind alongside his body. But Bruce Lee was never simply a martial arts student. He was a philosopher. He read voraciously Western philosophy, Eastern thought, physics, psychology. He understood that the body and the mind were not separate instruments. They were one, and the man who mastered that unity was capable of things that defied rational explanation. Before we arrive at that fateful evening, it is important to establish the facts, because what Bruce Lee could physically accomplish strains belief even today, decades after his death. These are not myths. They are documented, witnessed, and in many cases recorded. Bruce Lee stood only 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed between 130 and 145 pounds at his peak. He was not large by any measure, but his body fat percentage hovered around 8%, at a time when sports science had barely begun to quantify such things. His forearms, which he developed with almost maniacal dedication, were disproportionately thick for a man of his size, like coiled rope wrapped in skin. His 1-inch punch, delivered from a distance of literally 1 inch, could send a grown man stumbling backward across a room. Witnesses described the impact as comparable to being hit by a wrecking ball. Martial artists who trained for years and thought they understood power were left dumbfounded when they experienced it firsthand. His speed was the thing that truly separated him from every other martial artist of his generation. His punches were recorded at speeds that high-speed cameras of the era struggled to capture. He reportedly asked filmmakers to slow down footage of his strikes because at normal speed, audiences literally could not see the hits land. His 2-finger push-ups, his fingertip push-ups, his ability to hold his arm extended with the 125-pound barbell for extended periods. These were not performance tricks. They were the product of years of borderline insane dedication. What made Bruce Lee truly unique was not his physical ability alone. It was his philosophy. He called his fighting system Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. But it was far more than a fighting style. It was a way of being. Bruce rejected the rigidity of traditional martial arts. He believed that style itself was a prison. A man who fights only with Wing Chun, he argued, has already limited himself. A man who is truly free has no style. He adapts, flows, and responds to reality as it presents itself. His famous metaphor was water. Be like water, which takes the shape of any container, which can drip or crash, which yields and yet wears down the hardest stone. This philosophy had practical consequences. When Bruce fought, he did not perform techniques. He responded. His opponents often described a terrifying sensation. Before they had decided to throw a punch, Bruce had already moved. He had absorbed their intention before it became action, and answered it before it arrived. His students, among them some of the most accomplished martial artists and fighters in America, spoke of him with something approaching reverence. Chuck Norris, who was himself a world champion at the time, said plainly that Bruce Lee was the fastest man he had ever seen. That statement, from a man of Norris's caliber, carries enormous weight. The incident has been recounted in various forms over the decades. The exact setting varies depending on the source. Some place it at a social gathering in Los Angeles, others at a martial arts demonstration or private event. But the essential facts are consistent enough to treat as credible. There was a man, enormous by any measure, reportedly approaching or exceeding 400 pounds, with the kind of size that fills a doorway and makes a room feel smaller just by entering it. He was the sort of man who had been told his whole life that his size was his power, and he had come to believe it absolutely. He moved through the world with the confidence of a man who had never genuinely been threatened, because physically, very few people would dare. Bruce Lee was present at the same event. He was already well known in martial arts circles by this point, though his true global fame was still building. To someone who did not know better, or who refused to know better, he might have looked like an unimpressive figure, average height, lean, quiet, the kind of man that a 400-pound bully might look at and see an opportunity. The giant made remarks about Bruce Lee's family. The accounts differ on the precise words, but they were deeply offensive, the kind of insult designed to humiliate, to provoke, to demean not just the man but the people he loved. In many cultures, and certainly in the Chinese tradition in which Bruce Lee was raised, an insult to one's family is not a casual slight. It is a direct attack on everything a man holds sacred. Those present described what happened next in almost identical terms. Bruce Lee became still, not nervous still, not backing down still, dangerously, quietly, terrifyingly still, the kind of stillness that a storm produces in the moments before it arrives. People who knew Bruce Lee well understood that his calmness in confrontation was not passivity. It was concentration. When Bruce Lee went quiet, he was not suppressing his response. He was organizing it. Every part of him was becoming coherent, focused, aimed. He reportedly gave the man a warning. Witnesses recall Bruce speaking calmly, without aggression in his voice, telling the man that he should stop, that this path led somewhere the man did not want to go. This was consistent with everything Bruce Lee taught and believed. He was not a man who sought violence. He sought to avoid it, to end it before it began. But he was also a man who understood that sometimes a warning is the last act of mercy before consequences become unavoidable. The 400-pound man laughed. He had the numbers on his side: size, weight, reach, the crude arithmetic of mass. He looked at the smaller man in front of him and calculated that the odds were entirely in his favor. He was, by every conventional measure, correct. Those who witnessed the exchange struggled afterward to describe it accurately, not because it was chaotic, but because it was so fast that their minds could not fully process it in real time. They knew something had happened. They were not entirely sure of the sequence. What they could confirm, Bruce Lee did not wait to be hit. He did not defend and then counter. He moved with the kind of total integration that he spent his life perfecting. Offense and defense collapsed into a single motion. He closed the distance between himself and a man 3 times his weight with a speed that bystanders described as shocking, unreal, almost impossible to track with the naked eye. The strikes were targeted, precise, and overwhelming. Bruce Lee did not brawl. He did not absorb punishment and trade blows. He operated on the principle that every engagement should be ended as quickly as possible, using the minimum force required. But that minimum force, in his hands, was extraordinary. He aimed for points of maximum vulnerability: the throat, the solar plexus, the knees. Not to cause unnecessary harm, but to eliminate the threat with efficiency. The 400-pound giant, a man who had probably never been seriously challenged in a physical confrontation in his adult life, found himself unable to respond, not because he lacked size or strength, but because size and strength, when faced with speed and precision at that level, become almost irrelevant. You cannot use weight that you never get to bring to bear. You cannot use strength when you are already on the ground. Stories like this once spread through the martial arts world, not because people enjoyed the spectacle of a large man being defeated, but because they illustrated something deeply important about the nature of real power. The 400-pound man had built his identity on the assumption that mass was the ultimate variable in any physical conflict. He had walked through life with a kind of impunity that comes from never having that assumption tested. And when it was finally tested, it collapsed entirely, not gradually, but instantly, because the man who tested it had spent his life understanding something that size alone could never teach. Bruce Lee understood that in a real confrontation, time is the most precious resource. Not strength, not size. Time. The fighter who controls time, who can move before the other has reacted, who can land 3 strikes before the opponent has finished deciding to throw 1, wins regardless of physical disparity. This is the core insight behind Jeet Kune Do, behind Bruce Lee's entire philosophy. Intercept the fist. Don't wait for the punch to arrive, and then respond. Meet it before it is even fully formed. A 400-pound man is formidable, but 400 pounds of mass moving at ordinary human speed is no match for 140 pounds moving at extraordinary speed with extraordinary precision. The physics are merciless. It is worth pausing to understand why the insult to Bruce Lee's family was the particular trigger for this confrontation. Because for Bruce Lee, family was not a sentimental abstraction. It was the foundation of everything. His relationship with his father was complex but deeply formative. Li Huichen introduced his son to performance, to discipline, to the idea that a man could transform himself through dedicated practice. His mother, Grace, gave him warmth, stability, and the experience of crossing cultural boundaries, something that would define his entire life and career. When Bruce Lee married Linda Emery in 1964, he built his own family with the same intensity he brought to everything else. He was a devoted husband and father. His son Brandon and daughter Shannon were not peripheral to his life. They were central to it. He spoke of fatherhood with the same seriousness he brought to philosophy and martial arts. To insult Bruce Lee's family was not merely to say rude words. It was to attack the most protected territory in his emotional world. And the man who did it had either not known this or had not cared. Either way, he found out. Stories like this one are part of the oral tradition that surrounds Bruce Lee. Passed from martial artist to martial artist, from gym to gym, from generation to generation. They are told not to glorify violence, but to transmit something about what Bruce Lee represented. He was the proof that the conventional hierarchies of physical power could be overturned. He was living evidence that a smaller man, through intelligence, dedication, philosophy, and relentless self-development, could render size irrelevant. In a world where physical dominance had always been associated with largeness, Bruce Lee was a walking refutation of that assumption. And this mattered far beyond martial arts. It mattered culturally. Bruce Lee arrived in America at a time when Asian men were routinely portrayed in popular culture as weak, passive, or comic. He demolished that image not with argument but with action. He was undeniably, inescapably powerful. He could not be dismissed or diminished by anyone who had actually seen him move. The 400-pound man who insulted his family that night was, in a sense, a representative of every force that had ever tried to diminish what Bruce Lee was. And like all such forces, he discovered that the diminishment was impossible. Perhaps the most remarkable part of the story is what Bruce Lee reportedly said after the confrontation. According to those who were present, he did not gloat. He did not celebrate. He did not even appear particularly agitated. He was, witnesses said, calm. The same calm he had been before it happened. This was entirely consistent with his philosophy. Bruce Lee did not fight to prove his superiority. He did not engage in violence to feed his ego. When he was asked about such confrontations in interviews, he consistently emphasized that the ideal outcome was always to avoid them entirely. The best fight, he said, is the one that never happens. But when avoidance was impossible, when a line had been crossed that honor required him to address, he addressed it completely, efficiently, and without hesitation. And then he moved on. Because for Bruce Lee, a confrontation was not a performance or an achievement. It was a problem that had presented itself and been solved. That equanimity, that ability to be fully dangerous and fully calm at the same time, is perhaps the most difficult thing for people to understand about Bruce Lee. In popular imagination, great fighters are supposed to be volatile, emotional, driven by aggression. Bruce Lee inverted this entirely. His emotion was controlled, directed, transformed into fuel rather than noise. The 400-pound giant woke up that morning thinking it was an ordinary day. He had no way of knowing that before the night was over, he would encounter someone who would fundamentally alter his understanding of what a human being was capable of. He chose the wrong target. He chose the wrong insult. He chose the wrong night. And he chose the wrong man. A man who had spent his life preparing for exactly this kind of moment, not because he wanted it, but because he understood that preparation was the only honest response to a world that could not always be controlled. Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973, at the age of 32. The world lost something irreplaceable that day. A philosopher warrior whose understanding of human potential was decades ahead of its time. But the stories remain. The footage remains. The philosophy remains. And those of us who study him understand something that the 400-pound man learned the hard way. Sometimes the most dangerous person is the one standing quietly in the corner, the one you underestimated, the one you pushed too far. Bruce Lee was that person. And on the night a 400-pound giant decided to insult his family, the world was reminded of it in a way that no one present ever forgot. Be like water, Bruce Lee once said. Water is soft, yielding, formless. And yet water, given time and pressure, will wear through the hardest stone. On that night, Bruce Lee was water, and the giant learned what happens when you dam the river.